You don't quit a ranger post in Alaska mid-season unless the park teaches you a rule you didn't know you were already breaking. The handbook gives you distances and stove checks and radio channels. The land adds the rest in a voice you feel in your bones. 3 of us turned our radios in before August because we finally listened. I'll tell you why in the way rangers tell stories to each other. Clean, practical, and only as strange as the facts require. I was on a backcountry detail based out of a fly-in strip that looked civilized from above and like stubborn hope from the ground. We covered a jumble of alder, muskeg, and glacial bowls the map pretended were simple. Our repeater lived on a ridge that sang in wind, a thin metallic hum that made you think of a coin spinning and never falling. In June, a solo hiker missed his Sunday checkout. Last seen Friday headed toward a saddle that bends compasses and eats weather for breakfast. We set an ICS board on a plywood table, blocked our grids, and pushed out in pairs. My partner, Lou, was one of those field minds that made the handbook feel like a friendly suggestion. He could smell rain an hour out and tell a safe alder tangle from one that hit a river by the way the gnats moved. We took the contour lines, called the hiker's name at intervals we'd agreed on, and listened to the sound of our own breathing until we forgot that we were the ones making it. In glacial country, echoes fold back wrong. You learn not to trust what comes running to you. At 21:06, our channel woke and gave us hope in a human voice. "I'm here," it said, close enough to make my scalp prickle. Protocol says confirm call sign, location, condition. I squeezed the mic copy, say again, identify. The voice answered in our cadence, crisp and textbook, but every transmission ended without the little courtesy beep our radios throw when you let go. It was nothing and it was everything. That beep is proof of life in aluminum and battery form. Lou tried humor. I tried command. The voice started repeating us a word behind, like we were talking to our own shadow. We came off the shoulder into muskeg that looked like a lawn dress for church. That stuff will take your boot to the shin if you get cocky. At the margin we found tracks that made no sense, sharp tread on one edge, then a clean gap through the soggy middle where any normal step should have sunk, then tread again on the far side. It was as if the ground had been bruised by someone skipping the worst part. We flagged it bright, logged our time, and kept climbing because daylight was thinning toward that late-night gray Alaska uses instead of dark. At 22:12, the voice came back, closer and wrong. No matter which way I turned, it stayed just behind my left ear. "Blue light," it said. "I'm under the blue light." We looked up because you do that before you decide what to think. The aurora had come thin, like a ribbon caught on a nail, rippling a green that didn't belong to this month. Another team tried triangulating. Every arrow we drew pointed back into our own grid, which is another way of saying know where you can reach in one life. By 1:10, frost was filming our sleeves, and our breath made the air look breakable. We pulled to the line cabin on the ridge because that stuff about not chasing after midnight is something you feel even if nobody wrote on a whiteboard. The cabin had a cot that leaned, a tin of tea some patient soul had left years ago, and windows that fogged with frost like lichen growing too fast. We didn't light the stove. Smoke is gossip where mountains listen. At 3:03, the roof creaked with footsteps, small and measured, like a child counting shingles with their toes. Lou's hand closed on my sleeve and settled there until I could name each knuckle. The radio hissed with no signal bars. Then it clicked the courtesy beep all by itself. "Thank you for waiting," the man's voice said, clear as a briefing. We held the mics, mouths dry, and didn't key up. The room was cold enough that our canteens thunked when we set them down. I could hear my pulse in a second, smaller beat I kept trying to assign to wind. We walked out in the first honest gray, the kind that lets tree lines sharpen. A ptarmigan thumped out from under a spruce like a bad idea with wings. We made it back to the ICS board by noon, pushed coffee at each other we didn't drink, and circled the place where tracks had skipped across muskeg. A pilot found a mylar scrap and a hat brim 2 valleys away 12 days later. Nobody wrote body recovery on the log. Lou signed out, slid his radio across the desk, and told me he loved the park too much to keep pretending he didn't hear it talk. My second break came on a lake, so still the sky had to check who was copying whom. You reach the public use cabin by canoe or ski, depending on whether the month prefers mosquitoes or frostbite. I was on restock duty with a dry bag full of batteries and the kind of broom that makes you think good thoughts about the last person who used it. The logbook smelled like old paper and mouse pellets when I opened it. A neat blockhand had signed a thank you to the ranger who brought lilacs down to the lake. It was dated 1998. Below it, the same hand had written the same line, same curl on the Y, with last week's date. I told myself some tourist was making a joke about ghosts and handwriting. I latched the window, set the new batteries near the lantern, and heard a draft run along my shins like a creek had changed its mind. Doors shut, windows latched. The steps came next, on the roof, and then down the wall, a slow count like an animal memorizing studs. I went outside to look for tracks, because that's the sort of answer that lets you keep your job. The spruce shingles were clean, the lake pretending to be a mirror I didn't want to look into. When I came back in, the logbook lay open to a blank page with a fresh line in that same tidy hand. Thank you for daylight. I shut the book and left the broom leaning. At the landing, I made my paddle strokes loud on purpose, like a person talking in a room they'd rather not share. 2 nights later, our board showed the cabin occupied. Dawn patrol skied over in a cold that gnawed through layers and found the stove warm. Tea steeping in 2 cups and no prints in the crust inside or out. Mara, who'd laughed at my 1998 theory over lunch, packed that afternoon. She told me later she'd dreamed of footsteps that stopped above her head and then felt the roof exhale. I stayed, stubborn or loyal, depending on who you asked. The park was home and home were both, and I had not yet admitted which questions I could not answer without getting lost. The third story is about sound, the kind you don't hear so much as feel. We escorted a research team to the margin of a glacier to service a time-lapse rig. The sky was bruise blue, the wind was knife clean, and the sun cups on the late snow made each step a question. The outlet stream looked shallow and harmless until you watched stones vanish in the milk and never touch bottom. We set pickets, built a belay, and sent their tech out clipped like a cautious spider. Waiting is when worry volunteers. We traded thermos swigs and jokes and listened to the ice breathe through our boots. Then the air pressed against my teeth. A low ache ran through jaw and sternum, and I knew the glacier was talking. A valley moves an inch, and your skeleton remembers. At first it was only weight, a pressure without sound. Then came a pop, a knuckled knock from inside the blue, polite as someone asking to be let in. We called the tech back. He waved, said 1 minute, and the knocking came again, 3 even beats that felt measured rather than made. He pivoted to retreat, and the crust under him smiled a lie. His right leg punched through into cold that dragged like hands. We hauled, rope humming, crampons biting only air until steel finally caught edge. He came up soaked and swearing, and still grinning the grin people, where when the worst has not yet introduced itself. The knocking moved under our feet then, slow and patient, like a thing learning our rhythm from below. I have never felt smaller. We flagged the bridge, filed a closure when we got service, and I woke at 3:17 for a week with 3 gentle knocks sounding from under my bed frame. Story 4 was the one that made me stop joking on the radio. We were covering a campground closure after bears tore the willows into tight green doors. My partner was Tyler, new enough to call me sir and old enough to recognize he was scared. At 23:40 a.m., neighbor reported a family overdue on the loop. We went in slow, speaking only what the book allows after midnight. Names become invitations when you say them wrong in the dark. Headlamps painted tunnel through alder. 40 yards out, 2 points of eye shine hung low and far apart. The wrong height for deer and wrong color for fox. Then they blinked away like coins under a palm. We kept the script. Face it, speak calm. Make yourselves large. At the far end we found the family zipped into their tent, sleeping like a house. On the walk back the eyes returned off our right. Deep in willow a man could not enter without becoming part of it. The shine lifted, not forward or back, but up, like something rose straight through branches without asking permission. The brush never moved. When we checked the ground at first light, there were no prints except a crushed oval where nearby stems had leaned and then regretted it. Tyler turned his radio in 2 days later. He left his checklist on the desk, a neat grid with a box next to every reason people use until the real one learns how to speak. The afternoon that finally set my pen down looked ordinary. Rain smelled close. I was alone at the station, writing about stove gaskets, when a boy about 10 came in and placed a lost and found whistle on the counter. He asked if his sister had checked in. I said we would need names, time, description. He said she was under the blue light. He had the smile of someone who had practiced it. When I glanced at the visitor log, the last entry was an hour old, and the door sensor showed nobody had opened or closed anything since. Outside, the sky had chosen two wrong moods at once. Too dark above the river and too bright above the spruce, like the park had been turned and had not settled yet. I filed the report. I stepped out and listened until the silence chose me back. That evening I wrote rules nobody had given me and taped them inside the radio box. We do not call names after dark. We do not chase whistles, bells, lights, or chimes. We treat repeaters that answer with no carrier beep as cliffs. Daylight is policy, not superstition. We do not deliver comfort to cabins after sundown unless we are already inside. We log oddities like we log weather, not to win the story, but to keep the next hand steady. I lasted 2 more weeks. A pilot friend set his floats on the lake and told me to climb in for a lap. He said I sounded small on the radio. We circled the valley with the engine purring like apology. From above the muskeg was a quilt someone had left out in rain, green stitched to gray, and every creek shone like a thread being pulled tight. He asked if the job was worth the way. I flinched at my own name. I told him the truth. I loved the place more than my stubbornness, and that meant leaving before it asked harder. I turned my radio in with warm batteries and my notebook with the corners gone soft. I wrote daylight only one last time on the cabin board and left the logbook closed because some thanks are not mine to accept. I did not tell bar stories. I slept in a room where the window remembered which way to darken. When friends later asked if Alaska scared me off, I said no. It taught me how to tell the difference between brave and obedient, between search and chase, between curiosity and invitation. That is why 3 of us quit mid-season. Not because the park hates people, but because it loves its own hours, and we learn to love them back.